Tin.
Hi, I'm Ed.
And we are Tin and Ed. We are artists originally from Australia, and we've been living and working in New York for the past 8 years. We're super excited to be here, and we brought our inflatable friend with us on the plane, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in our talk.
We actually haven't named it yet, so if anyone has any ideas, let us know.
So our talk will probably be the least technical that you'll be hearing today. We're focusing very much on conceptually why we use Houdini.
And why proceduralism is sort of important to our practice as well.
Yeah. And so our work really explores our connection to the natural world. We are living in a time where a lot of us feel really disconnected to nature. We believe, but also that we're part of the natural world, not separate from it. And so our work explores this entanglement of life across biological, geological, and cosmic systems. So we deeply believe that we're part of nature. Our work tries to foster a sense of wonder and curiosity for the world around us. And we do this through large-scale, immersive, and interactive installations and sculpture. Our work explores this permanent boundary as well between physical and digital space. So a lot of our exhibitions incorporate physical sculptures, but also digital and virtual elements as well.
We always love when there's worlds kind of intermix and really are presented in the same kind of way.
And our exhibitions are shown in museums and public spaces in the US and many other places around the world. We also collaborate with different brands like Hermès and Apple to create images and videos and installations. This is a work that we did with Hermès in Hong Kong, just creating a series of different marine ecosystems. And in terms of our background, we come from more traditional art making backgrounds, studying painting and printmaking and drawing. But our journey has sort of led us to more physical sort of works, as well as playing with different technologies like Houdini. And we're really interested in emerging technologies and tools. Everything we do with digital tools is very much self-taught and through experimentation and play, and a lot of online tutorials. One of the key tools we use daily is Houdini, and we use it to simulate biological, geological forms and processes, growing digital life forms, simulating ecosystems, generating intricate textures, and imagining how things might evolve to survive on a changing planet. Today we'll share 3 artworks, Deep Field, Multitudes, and We're Made of Time. Houdini plays a central role in these projects. We use it as a tool to help us bring invisible processes of the natural world to life. And we not only use Houdini to create digital screen-based works, but as you'll see, we also use it to create physical objects and sculptures. So the first project we'll share with you is called Deep Field. It's an augmented reality artwork that was launched at the Getty Museum in LA and the Art Gallery of New South Wales. It's traveled now to more than 10 cities and countries around the world. And it's essentially an AR artwork that allows participants from all around the world to co-create an ecosystem together by creating these botanical drawings. Their drawings get uploaded in real time to our global database, and then they grow in 3 dimensions in augmented reality. They're mapped onto 3-dimensional plant structures that have been created in Houdini. Obviously a very sort of great place to create plant structures using L systems and all these
Fibonacci sequences.
Yes, and these tools. And we've got more than 30,000 drawings in this database now. So we were asked this year to present this work at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And they also commissioned us to create an installation on their top floor alongside the work. And so for this work, we used Houdini completely to sort of imagine what this space could look like, what the physical sort of elements of this space could look like. One of the elements is these large rugs that were around the floors. And for that, we created that with Houdini. We designed these in Houdini, these rugs. We're really inspired by aerial sort of perspectives of Australian desert landscapes. And we used Houdini to create those landscapes, those landscape designs, and we scattered them with drawings and fossils and geoglyphs to create these sort of rugs, essentially.
And yeah, this was all, I think sort of before, like we use Copernicus a lot, and, you know, patterns and textures are a really big sort of part of our work. And I think sort of before Copernicus, we, you know, were making patterns and textures in Photoshop and importing it. And obviously what we love now is with Copernicus really sort of integrated in Houdini and being able to make images in Houdini, patterns in Houdini. It really allows us to iterate and play and kind of really see how everything kind of comes together.
And so to produce the rugs, once we sort of designed them, we worked and collaborated with these artisans in India who use really traditional rug making techniques passed down over centuries to create the rugs. All the wool is hand dyed to the colors that were specified. And then they're sort of produced and hand cut, actually. All the different details are sort of sculpted into the rug. And then they were sort of laid out in the museum as part of the installation. We also created some large sort of, it was a very large space, created these large sort of sculptures. One of them is there on the right. And again, using Houdini to sort of visualize not just the sculptures, but also the museum space as well.
Yeah, we love working at scale. I think it really helps us to sort of visualize, you know, what a space might feel like when you're within it and when you're a participant of an experience like this. What we kind of like about this, we actually have tin and ed as a unit of measure. So we've got like 3D scans of ourselves in there, and that kind of helps us to visualize ourselves in the space. It would be nice if there were like 30 or 40 tin and eds around. That'd be kind of helpful for us a bit, I think.
So yeah, we use Houdini to model these hybrid life forms, and these forms are really, the intention of them is that they're sort of blurred in terms of the boundaries between something that's terrestrial or marine or animal or plant. It could be a flower or a mushroom or an octopus. It's sort of ambiguous in that way. They're hybrid life forms. And, you know, we're sort of using forms that echo these different living things in nature, like spirals and tentacles, which seem to sort of perpetuate in sort of natural sort of systems. And then again, we use Copernicus to create the graphic textures that we map onto the 3D forms. These patterns were really inspired by different sort of lichens that grow on rocks. And then we map them over these 3D sort of forms to create our hybrid life forms. And then we work really closely with our production partners to turn these 3D models into patterns that can be printed and cut into textiles that are then sewn together from hundreds of pieces to create the final sort of sculpture. And each sculpture is made from hundreds of pieces, all cut and sewn together, not by us, thankfully, but working very closely with our production partners. And then we fill it with air. And the inflatables at MoMA, they were suspended, actually. So this is what the space looked like once everything was installed. The 3 large sort of area rugs, which almost feel like islands, and then the 2 large inflatable sculptures. And we also had a whole bunch of soft sculptures that sat around that people can sit on. They were filled with really soft material, even though they were sort of referencing different sort of granite formations from this volcanic area in France that we've been traveling to. And so this created this sort of landscape within the museum space that you could sort of sit on and sort of be in. And then the inflatable sculptures were also designed to be kinetic. We used a timer to modulate the fan so that it sort of it actually breathed and bloomed throughout the course of the day. And, you know, the way that it moved is fully through airflow. We, you know, from sort of experimentation, we understand that, you know, the different sort of areas and different forms create different air pressure. And so with that, we can create forms that can choreograph a kind of movement with just by modulating airflow. So this one's not moving, but in the museum, they were sort of blooming and growing throughout the day. And then, people were filled the space and created the drawings on the iPads and were able to sort of live within this space that was digital and now is physical.
And we were super happy with the way that this turned out. Turnout for it was fantastic. It was almost a little bit too good because we wanted to get a lot of people through the space, but a lot of people didn't want to leave. They were having a really good time. So I think that's, for us, that's really nice when people really want to engage with the work in that kind of way.
We made it too comfortable. So our next project is called Multitudes, and it sits in a similar world to this last work that we just showed you. We were exploring hybridity, and we, with our work, are always trying to sort of think about what we can learn from the natural world. One of those things that exist in nature, this idea of symbiosis, how different living things live together in ways that are mutualistic and not parasitic. And so, for this, we're really looking at different sort of life forms and how they live together and hoping to sort of, share how that is a better way to exist. And so, these are some symbiotic organisms. Lichens are a symbiotic organism made up of fungi, algae, and cyanobacteria living together to create a new form, as are corals, which are polyps and algae. We ourselves are also hybrids. We are sort of within us and on us are bacteria and fungi and viruses, more microorganisms our microbiome is made of than there are human cells. And so there are actually more of them than there are of us, even on us. And so this idea that we are also hybrids and we are also ecosystems is something that's sort of interesting to us. And this project specifically looked at the ocean and the deep sea and looking at different relationships between living things in our oceans. We love this one between the Argonaut octopus and the jellyfish. This one, the carrier crab, which attaches different sort of life forms onto itself as a form of protection, is really interesting. And then the other organism, the anemone and the urchin, which doesn't move very much, is able to sort of increase its food resources. So that's a really interesting symbiotic relationship.
So, looking at these sort of forms here, if you think this is weird, nature is so much weirder, and that's kind of why we love it.
Yeah. And there are so many incredible creatures that are so alien, in our deep oceans that we don't really sort of think about. These are the ones that really inspired us. These are called siphonophores. They are essentially a colonial organism. They look like an individual, but they're actually made out of hundreds of thousands of different organisms that have different functions that come together to survive. And also we thought about what happens if these sort of deep sea creatures get washed up onto our beaches and they sort of are taken out of their ecosystems. What do they look like? So we used Houdini as a way to model newly imagined life forms. We used a procedural sort of process to create new siphonophores by recompositing different sort of body parts and organisms in a sort of randomized and generative way.
Yeah, and what we love about Houdini, I think we could have sort of hand-placed all of these elements ourselves, but it wouldn't have that feeling of randomness and spontaneity and almost like infinite creativity. I think that's, when we look at the natural world, it is infinitely creative. There are infinite permutations. And that's kind of, that's what these systems are kind of creating. And I think, having elements that are a little bit off balance, a little bit out of kilter, that's something that we really like from sort of using Houdini like this.
Yeah, and that's what we love about Houdini is it really sort of echoes and sort of reflects more accurately these processes in nature that sort of create, different sort of life forms. The evolutionary process is very much, built on sort of randomization of mutation. And so we can, create these different sort of parameters which actually start to generate these new life forms that we don't fully control, but they sort of become what they are essentially. So we also use, Houdini as a way to sort of enmesh different sort of physical forms to create new living things, to create different sort of bodily sort of relationships, to simulate those new potential sort of symbiotic relationships. And then again, we sort of have them produce and create into these large scale sculptures. This was in Melbourne, where we're from. and they're sort of larger than human scale sort of deep sea creatures that are now living on land in the King's Domain Garden in Melbourne. There were 13 of them, and they sort of created this new sort of interesting ecosystem where these deep sea creatures are coming onto and invading our urban sort of landscape. And, you know, I think for us, it's a way of getting us to think a little bit more about these living things that we have completely forgotten about because they live in such a different sort of part of the planet that we don't really get to access so much. And they were also lit up, you know, they were bioluminescent. Many creatures in the deep sea, most creatures in the deep sea are actually bioluminescent. And some of them were suspended as well. And so, yeah, we created this sort of ecosystem out of these large sort of sculptures and created these new sort of generative life forms using Houdini's sort of procedural modeling sort of tools. And the other part of this installation was a digital sort of screen-based work as well. And for that, we really looked at the motion of very simple sort of marine and aquatic sort of life forms, how they move in water. And we're really interested in artificial life systems, voids, and how very simple rules can start to generate and create as they get overlaid, these rules, they create more complexity and emergent sort of properties and behaviors. We're sort of reading Valentina Brattenberg, who's this Italian neuroscientist and cyberneticist, a book called Vehicles, which really talked about simple reactive behaviors. And so we're, you know, within this, we're thinking about these video works, not as so much as animation, but more of a simulation, by simply sort of embodying, like embedding simple behavioral sort of properties to these organisms.
So yeah, in this example, we're not actually animating the organism. We're just sort of telling it to follow, well, the red dot, which is sort of representative of food. So once you start to kind of like multiply those behaviors, everything starts to get much more sort of complex.
Yes, and so that starts to form its own sort of almost life in a way, these systems. And so the work itself was sort of just embedding these different sort of properties into a lot of these different creatures, and then they start to sort of create their own sort of deep sea ecosystem that are sort of animated. They're all sort of evolving and living and dying within this sort of world. And they were sort of shown on these large screens throughout the park as well. And so our last project that we'll share with you, it's called We're Made of Time, and it is a screen-based work. It was commissioned as a public artwork by Moynihan Train Hall, which is part of Penn Station in New York. Penn Station's the busiest train station in actually not just New York, but the United States. And there were 35 plus screens throughout the station, including this very large panoramic sort of screen. And this is Moynihan Train Hall. It's actually a building that's been around since the early 1900s, and was part of Penn Station, which was actually more grand than Grand Central Station, but it was unfortunately torn down in the 60s. And we're really actually interested in, you know, the material ecology of that train station. It was made from a lot of the material called Tennessee marble, and they reused that material for the renovations as well. And Tennessee marble, we learned, is biogenic limestone, which means that it actually is made from the accumulation of different of these ancient marine life forms that accumulate over millions of years and compress into rock. And so we were interested for this project in thinking about how materials change and evolve over really long distances of time. And so something that's biological can become geological, you know, over hundreds of millions of years. And then they end up in our museums as, you know, these specimens, rocks and crystals. And so we're really sort of thinking about this idea of collections as a way to think about a more expanded sense of time. So we both grew up in Australia and spent a lot of time in nature growing up, and also collected a lot of rocks and shells and things like that. And for this project, we Our research took us to Tucson, Arizona, which is where the largest gem and mineral show in the world happens. And we spoke to all these people who were completely obsessed with, opals and rocks and meteorites. And we were able to learn about how these different forms formed. And also we added a whole bunch to our collection as well. This is one of the things that we bought. It's a meteorite that's it's 4.5 billion years old, which is the same age as our solar system, our planet, our sun. Just to think about things from such an expanded sense of time was what this work is really about. Houdini as a simulation sort of tool was perfect to sort of start to think about that sort of expanded sense of time. And so what we were sort of referencing originally was this idea of, science and how we understand the world starts with just like a sketch of, a mountain or a rock. And scientists have used studies over time to understand the world around us. And those are the tools that we've had. Science and art are sort of connected in that way that we sort of simulate the things that are around us in order to understand them. For this project, we're using Houdini as a tool to simulate, these different sort of objects and processes as a way to understand them better and find insights into them that we can't without sort of being able to recreate them in some way. This project was really about us sort of using Houdini to as a tool to simulate these different geological processes. This is erosion, which usually happens over hundreds of millions of years, but Houdini is amazing because we can compress that time scale to a few seconds, which allows us to see how things erode very quickly. And it makes us realize that actually things that are very solid and static, because we exist on a human scale, over hundreds of millions of years, they're actually very alive and they're very fluid. And so these different simulations show us that the Earth is very alive, and rocks and things like that have a kind of life to them as well. We simulated petrification, which is where wood turns into stone and crystals. Again, how something biological can turn into something completely geological, that over millions of years, everything goes through these profound transformations. Houdini is able to sort of help us sort of visualize that, to condense that time scale and to actually see how that sort of happens. We're also interested in minerals and crystals and how they sort of form over large periods of time as well. And we created a crystal generator in Houdini that allowed us to create infinite amount of sort of crystal formations, and also can actually simulate how they grow as well, so that we can sort of see how they grow over different sort of bodies, like rocks. We also looked at fossils and how they're used to actually allow us to sort of understand what time certain rocks sort of strata is from. And so we simulated our own sort of fossils as well for our collection of objects, and invented newly imagined fossils for the work as well. And so we took all these geological and sort of rocks and processes, which are all on different time scales, and put them together in a collection like you would in a museum. But we set them in a sort of a volcanic landscape instead. And it's essentially our collection of rocks, but also of processes, of time scales, of biological and geological things that sort of exist on our planet. And that created the composition for the work at Moynihan Train Hall. And that created that sort of panorama that we showed across the 35 screens. Yeah. And so, playing with Houdini has taught us is that it allows us to really see time from a different perspective, from a non-human perspective. And it actually shows us how we're not objects, but we're actually processes entangled within these vast systems across time and space, living and non-living, seen and unseen. And so the work for us offers this moment of contemplation and a reminder of how alive the world is, beyond what we can even fully perceive or understand. And so for us, so in conclusion, for us, Houdini is not only a powerful creative tool, it allows us to simulate the logic of natural systems, from the microscopic to the planetary, We use it to visualize the effects of deep time on the formation of rocks and minerals, and to imagine entirely new life forms and ecosystems. It's a way for us to explore and to express the complexity, the beauty, and the interconnectedness of the natural world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any questions? Not yet.
Legit.
Thank you. Really beautiful work. I'm interested to hear more of the process that you two do to turn like something like this from Houdini to physical form. Like, do you talk about your testing process, either like in Houdini or in real life, to figure out things like can the sand contain, the practice under shape, or what the pieces they're cut into Houdini, will it, when it's at pressure, maintain a form?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because part of it is we've made so many of these, part of it is from experience and making things that don't work. And part of it is taking that and now, within Houdini, we can also simulate to some extent how it fills up with pressure. With pressure. Yeah. And so it does sort of simulate it to an extent that we can sort of see how it works, because for example, the tentacles, they need more pressure to actually fill up and sort of inflate and move. And so we know that they're the last ones to actually, bloom in a way. And so we know that certain forms essentially need more air and take more time, therefore, to actually move, to inflate. And so when we design it, we sort of think about what the order of how it sort of fills up becomes. It's usually the first central mass, and then it's the extremities, essentially. And so with not this one, but the other one that we created, they had quite different size sort of tentacles in a way, and so they sort of came up all at different times. But it's been a learning sort of process.
Yeah, I think we had a couple of years ago, we were installing, and this inflatable looks like a big droopy thing before it's inflated, and then as we were watching it being inflated for the first time, it was suspended, and we could sort of see this actually really sort of beautiful movement happening. So I think that sort of sparked the idea of like, oh, we should actually really sort of investigate this. Obviously, Houdini's a great kind of procedural tool for this kind of thing. We can do some sort of simulation. I think to get it 100% accurate, we need to kind of do some kind of physical testing and then kind of get that back into the simulations. They're really good for like if we want to simulate it on the ground, how is it going to feel on the ground? Because this was designed to be suspended, but it also works, in different sort of arrangements, and we can use Houdini to simulate those different sort of how it's sort of placed. But part of it is testing it, through the simulations of Houdini, and then going to prototype, and then sort of going back and forth almost in a way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let's go. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.